back to the Childhood Cancer Perspective, and thank you all for continuing to allow me to come into your homes and into your podcast and be able to share our story as well as so many others. Now, I'm just going to preface this by saying that my guest today is somebody that I've been trying to get on this podcast for quite a few months. It's very tough to nail them down. They're very busy, and that's okay, and it's understandable. But today, my guest is PJ Myers, and her daughter Ailani is who we're going to talk about and their story. So welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time with me today.
You're welcome. And I know we've been trying to do this for a while. My apologies. That's life, and it's been good because Ailani, has had a lot of things going on, and I have too, which is great. But I'm happy to be here finally with you to make the time. And it was kind of last minute too. I was like, okay, I got a break, a little bit of time. Let's do this thing.
Yeah, 100%. It was just, it's cool that we're able to kind of connect on this level. For history's sake, this will be the 6th year that we'll be going to CureFest, and it's something that we go to every single year. And that's where we got our first kind of introduction to not only your family, but Ailani, her kind of electric personality, and the singing voice. Everything was something that we were experiencing there. Over the years, it's grown. She doesn't take crap from anybody and does things kind of on her own terms, which is apparent with all of that. But then, being able to meet you and speak to you. Last year, I was able to have a really good conversation with you at the Golden Toast dinner and kind of connect, as just people going through this as parents and, on a more personal level. So I want to hear kind of about, you and the story of kind of getting into this and why we're a part of this community at all, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Awesome, heartbreaking community, obviously because our children was diagnosed with cancer. To be quite honest with you, I was very ignorant to the fact of childhood cancer until I wasn't, right? Until Ailani was diagnosed. I served in a Navy for 24 years and just really didn't know much about childhood cancer besides St. Jude, videos. I'm just going to be honest, there wasn't a cancer child in my family or any friends that I had known of. And so my husband and I, we were both military, both Navy, dual mil in the Navy. I had just retired in 2018. And unfortunately, Ailani was diagnosed in 2019, not even a year after I retired. And we were PCSing from Monterey, California. Our cars were shipped. Our household goods had been shipped. My husband and I, we flew out, and Ailani and I went to Texas to visit family. And my husband went to Pensacola, Florida, and we were going to be in Texas, she and I, for a week. And then we were headed to Florida to join him. He had some training to do there for a couple months. And then we were headed on to our next place of training for him, just a military family, right? You never know, you're always moving. And unfortunately, when she and I was in Texas visiting my family, that's when she was diagnosed. And she was diagnosed with leukemia. And I know you asked me a specific thing, but it kind of flows on into the next thing and the next thing. But yeah,
this is one of those that's, and you mentioned St. Jude. And again, this is just kind of putting this into perspective, is that pediatric cancer as a whole in our community we just can't be defined by a commercial, because 99% of what you see behind, or what happens, is behind the scenes. It's not what you see on TV. And that's just kind of the reality of all of this. The diagnosis to get there, the symptoms that don't make anybody in the world think it could be that serious. I mean, for us, our daughter, it was severe constipation and a little bit of an arm pain that we couldn't pinpoint. We had no idea that would lead to a rare form of brain cancer. None of this makes any sense, right? And so, tell us about the symptoms that she experienced that kind of put her on that path of diagnosis.
Many symptoms. Like I said, we were visiting family in Texas, visiting my family, and what she had was what I found out to be was petechiae. And it was I was like, what is that? It's like a little rash on her belly, and then it went away, and then it came back, and I was like, that is so weird. What is that? And my husband, like I said, he was in Pensacola, and I was like, she got this little rash, and it's kind of look like a rash, but it's like under the skin. And I was like, I think I'm gonna take her to urgent care. And he was like, she's fine. He was like, I think you're just overreacting, because she was running around, she was playing, she was just having the best time with her cousins, she hadn't seen for a very long time. She was eating. She was good. She was great. That's what I noticed was the petechiae. And I just was like, I don't know. And we're here in Texas. We're only going to be there for a week. But I was like, I'm just going to take her just in case. And I did. I took her to the urgent care. And they were like, well, this is called petechiae. It's really not that big of a deal. But if you want her to get blood work, you need to take her to the ER, the emergency room. I was like, yeah, I think I'll get her blood work. And I was like, she looks fine, because she did look fine. And that's what I did. So I took her to the emergency room, and they said, well, we have to draw blood, give her a needle. And she sat there in that bed, and she did so great. That was her first time like getting a needle drawn, and she was just ready to get to McDonald's, because I told her I was going to get her a Happy Meal when we left. I didn't think it was anything. I thought we were just going to go, and they was going to say maybe she got bit by a bug or something, or it's too hot coming from California. She got blood work done, and the next thing I knew, it was like a big rush, right? Oh, we got to get you guys to, we're going to take her to a children's hospital, which is like 45 minutes away I'm from Waco, Texas. And so they wanted to send her to a children's hospital. It was in Temple, Texas. And I'm like, you need to get us an ambulance and take us there. And they said, well, she needs platelets. And I'm like, okay, what she need platelets for? They wasn't telling me anything at this hospital. They just said, well, when you get to the children's hospital, they'll tell you more. I was like, okay. So this 45-minute ride in a monsoon, because they were like, well, we were going to put you on the helo, but it was raining so bad. It was, if you ever been in Texas, and it was a Texas storm. Okay. And so I'm calling my husband on the phone. I'm like, they're putting us in an ambulance and taking us to the children's hospital. They're not telling me anything besides she needs platelets. That's it. And he was like, I think it'll be okay. Just let me know, on the phone with him. We get there to the children's hospital, and they take us immediately up to the oncology floor. And I'm like, oncology floor? But I still it wasn't all the way registering. I'm just like in a fog, and, my heart's racing and beating, and I'm just like, what is happening? She wasn't sick, and she wasn't a sick child. She wasn't a sick baby. We didn't have really any issues with her being sick. And so we get into the room. They put us in a room immediately, and the oncologist came in, and she said, she looks really good. She said, I think it's one of two things: Epstein-Barr virus or leukemia. And I'm thinking, what? I really didn't know what leukemia was. I didn't know. I've told you I was very ignorant to cancer and childhood cancer, And on the phone with my husband, we're FaceTiming, so she can tell us the same thing at the same time. And she said, but I think it's Epstein-Barr. We got some more tests to do, and then we'll let you know. But she does need platelets, and we're going to start with the platelets. So that's why, I think, okay, they put us in the room so she can get platelets, and then we're going to be out of here. Yeah, so that was the first couple hours of being diagnosed. Not even being diagnosed, but getting to that point of being diagnosed. Yeah.
It comes at you fast, and there's not a whole lot of time to react. I think that's honestly some of the criticisms that we get from the outside of this community is that, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Or, because we don't have a whole lot of time to act or react to what's going on. You're just trying to figure it out and give your kid the best opportunity at surviving or coming through all of this with still not knowing all the answers, right? For us, there was a CT done. They said there's a mass. They're very careful not to say tumor or anything else. They say mass. They say it nice. It's like it's a gentle ease into this world. And I know that for my wife, she broke down, and I was just in a shock. I don't think I reacted at that moment, except I broke down later. But you try to figure all this out in a very short amount of time with very little answers. And the reality is, I think the doctors are being careful to not say any more than to get you upset or get you worried before they know all the answers. But you're on that oncology floor. It's starting to come to a reality or fruition of what's going on. What do you do from there? And to be honest with you, also, I reacted when my wife was taking my daughter to the doctor, to the ERs, or to urgent care for her symptoms, like I mentioned, the same way that your husband did. It's not that big of it. What are we doing? We'll get it fixed. And for me, it was because I wasn't going to allow those intrusive thoughts of what my wife was thinking to happen. And I felt like if I blocked it out, it just wouldn't come true. Unfortunately, here we are, but talking about it and letting other people know the road to where we were and what we've been through, I think is the best way that we can kind of raise more awareness about this.
Right. A lot of people, I think they think about what I could have done, what I should have done, and it was these signs and it was those signs and all these things. And we really didn't have any of that. Like I said, she had the petechiae. She was eating, everything was fine. I just said, let's check it out. And that was it. And we got in a hospital. And the oncologist said she thought it was Epstein-Barr or leukemia. They did more tests. She came back in the room that night and she said, I'm sorry, but it is leukemia. And I still really didn't know what it was. I'm trying to Google, but I'm also trying to let Ailani was running around the room playing. She wasn't sitting in a bed sick or anything. So hearing it's leukemia, but my child is just playing and running around and looking perfect. I'm like, I just didn't know. So my husband was like, I'll be there as soon as I can. He was on a flight first thing the next morning from Pensacola, Florida to Texas. And the main oncologist walked in our room that morning and he said, she looks great. He was like, she looks really good. And I thought, yeah, so that she's not sick, right? Like what's happening? And he sat me down, so very gentle, so very kind. And he said, she has leukemia, B-cell leukemia. And we have to figure out, he's like, there's lots of different leukemias, and we have to make sure exactly which one she had. He said, but she looks good. I think you caught this very early. She doesn't have any symptoms or anything right now besides the low platelets, and they wasn't as high. Her white count wasn't as high as I guess they could have been. And so he said, she's going to be fine. She's going to have 2.5 years of chemotherapy. She's going to get through this. You guys are going to get through it. She's going to be okay. You will see her graduate. And at that moment, I thought, and my husband wasn't there, I just felt a little bit of hope. And I took a little breath and I think I cried. And I was like, okay, so we can do this. All right, 2.5 years. And he said, I will tell you, it's not going to be easy 2.5 years. It will be rough for her. It'll be rough for you guys, but you'll get through this. He said, take lots of pictures of her. Take lots of videos every day. He said, because her looks are going to change. She's going to go through a lot of chemotherapy. She's going to lose her hair. She's going to do, he just walked me through all these things. And I'm just sitting there bawling and listening. And I'm like, okay, but what I held on to is he said, you're going to get through this and you will see her graduate. And I still, to this day, I always think about that, So I think I was very fortunate and so thankful that the first oncologist that we talked to was so thoughtful in his words and so caring and, had great bedside manners. However, that same oncologist came back to us in 4 weeks with tears in his eyes. And he said, I'm so sorry. Her leukemia is very rare and it's very hard to treat. And she's going to have a lot more therapy. And I need to get you guys to a bigger hospital because unfortunately we can't treat her here. So yeah, it was like, thinking, okay, we can do this. We got this. We just got to be strong and get through all the things. And then it's like we got knocked down not even 4 weeks into it. We just found an apartment. We was in a Ronald McDonald house, and it was like my husband's the Navy was just so great because they allowed him to come to Texas. He was supposed to be in training there. He already had this mapped out, and they allowed him to end his training and come to Texas to be with us, so she could get through the Originally, they said, if you could be here for the first year for her to get through treatment, I think after that, when she gets in maintenance, it'll be okay to move. So that was before the 4 weeks came with the new test results, of her leukemia. And he got there. We had just found a little apartment. We had our 2 suitcases because that's what we had when we left California, right? We had our 2 suitcases. We had some Navy friends that drove our cars because they had got shipped to Pensacola. They drove our cars to Texas. We got signed a lease for this apartment. We got some some furniture to have for a little while. You rent the furniture. And Ailani had an appointment, and the oncologist said, where's your husband? I was like, well, he's signing the lease we found an apartment. When he said he needs to get here right now. He needs to get here. And so that's when he told us about she has what's called KMT2A. Back then it was called MLLR. And now they renamed it to KMT2A, which put her prognosis at 30% survivable past 5 years. So before that, he was like, her cancer is 95% curable. And then 4 weeks later, he had to tell us this news. So a lot. And our story is so different than a lot of families. The same, but different, For one thing, in the military, moving, not being with family, being all over the place. Sometimes I don't want to tell too much of it because I don't want too many people to get discouraged, But I also want to tell some of it so that people can be inspired.
Oh, I think it's understandable. Every single one of our stories is unique, but they cross paths, almost every single one of them. Whether it's a diagnosis, it's working with incredible teams, doctors and nurses that have incredible bedside manner when it comes to just talking to you like a person, like a parent, like not a patient number is so crucial to just surviving the day as in your own mental capacity. Because for us, there were several people along the way with our daughter's treatment that we had to say they're no longer allowed to be near her because of their bedside manner. And it's unfortunate because while you've taken a job to work with kids and you have to understand that they're scared, but their parents are scared, we need to be able to be comforted. You may not be able to give us the answers we want, but it's the way you talk to us that makes a huge difference. I was going to ask you actually, and I think you answered it a little bit based on, being a military family, how, I don't want to say forgiving, but how understanding and they were willing to work with you with your husband being able to be there with you for treatments and things like that. Has it ever been any kind of an issue with that, with just you have to be in a certain place? I mean, I don't have any connection to my own self being in the military, so you're telling me things I don't know, but was that ever an issue?
Well, I'll tell you, the military, the Navy for us was very accommodating, very helpful. Our military friends, like I said, they drove our cars from state to state. They were bringing us meals in Texas, and then we moved to Maryland, and they were bringing food to the Ronald McDonald House, dropping off food. The thing about our situation that is so different is because Ailani relapsed quite a bit of times, quite a bit. And so if I could back up, when we were told, we thought we were going to be in Texas for her first 12 months of treatment. And then when when the results came back that her leukemia was very rare and we needed to go to a bigger hospital, we sat there with this oncologist and my husband and I was like, what do we do? Should we go to St. Jude? Like maybe we should just go to St. Jude. Where do we go? What do we need to do? We don't know. And we were fortunate because this oncologist had come from St. Jude. So he had been a doctor, oncologist there for a while. And he knew we were in the military. So he knew, a little bit about us. And he said, you could go to St. Jude. They will definitely accept you just because of her rare, how rare her leukemia is. They will accept you. He said, but I think you guys maybe should stay in the COG realm and go to Johns Hopkins. There's a top leukemia doctor there. I've been talking back and forth with him. And he said, if you go to St. Jude, it's big, right? And you might not be, how did he put it? You might not be able to be with your doctor every day, right? It'll be different doctors or MPs or whatever. He said, it is very big. He said, I think you should go to Johns Hopkins. And so we were like, okay. And that was easier anyway for my husband because he could be stationed here in Maryland at that time. And so that's what we did. We had about a week to get our stuff together, get that furniture back and say, I'm sorry, we got to get out of this lease. Ailani had chemotherapy one day and the next day we wrapped her up. We got on a plane and we got to Baltimore and walked into Johns Hopkins with her and see what they had to offer. So the military was very accommodating and helpful for us pretty much all the way. There was one area that was a little bit shaky, and that's because she had relapsed so many times. And in the military, you can be put on what they call humanitarian orders, where they will allow you to be with your sick family member, whether they're in a hospital or whatever, and you just check in like, I'm here at the hospital, and that's kind of like your duty station. And so that's what my husband was on for that first year. And he was about to come off of that, but at Ailani's year mark, she relapsed. And so I was like, now what to do? It's like you can only do that so many times before they're like, okay, you're not really fit for duty. You have this big thing you have to deal with. You're going to either do your military orders or get out. So there was just a small little area that he had to go through that was very stressful with the military. But overall, for the most part, they were helpful and accommodating. And
I mean, it's incredible. Honestly, I think that, we talk a lot about in this community, a lot of it comes down to parents lose their jobs, parents lose that income, that ability to be able to provide. But, their main focus is their child, which is what it should be. I mean, you shouldn't have to worry about the stress of a job or about all of that kind of stuff. And, I'm glad that the military was as accommodating as they were to allow you guys to be together and to, be part of her treatment and go where you needed to go. I mean, you're obviously kind of used to moving around with the background and stuff like that, but this is not the reason that you want to be moving around. This is not the thing you want to be doing. You mentioned that she had relapsed quite a few times. And I also know that, this is the second or third hospital in Maryland that you were at.
Our first hospital was in Texas. Our second hospital was Johns Hopkins in Maryland. So when we moved from Texas, we moved her to Hopkins. And the recommendation was for her to have a bone marrow transplant when we got to Hopkins. And so she had her transplant. My husband, Kurt, was her donor. She's our only child, and there was not a 10 out of 10 in the registry for her, for bone marrow registry. Just wasn't. She had a couple things. She's a mixed race child, for one thing. So that really knocked the numbers down a lot for having for finding a match. But we definitely looked. Our families looked. We had people like swabbing all over, trying to see if they were matched and asking, can I, be a match for her? Can I? It's like, I don't know. Be sure enough to swab and see, But unfortunately, she didn't, and we went with my husband because Hopkins pioneered haploidentical transplant, which is they can take a parent, and he was the best match at the time over me. So he was her first donor, bone marrow donor. And she did, it was hard. She had radiation, high dose chemotherapy, and she was 3 at the time she started her transplant. She was 2 when she was diagnosed. And, but she got through that, and she got to her year mark, and we were about to, celebrate and ring the bell and all this. And her results came back, and she had relapsed. It was pretty devastating again.
So they had initially started chemotherapy, the bone marrow transplant. And so how has her treatment changed over the years and just been kind of adjusted to what's going on? Has there been anything that she's been a part of that's made good impact, but also you've seen detriment based on how it's administered, things like that?
So, 2 bone marrow transplants. She had the first one. After she relapsed, she did CAR T-cell therapy. That was also at Johns Hopkins, and she did great with that. She had 9 months of no evidence of disease, but unfortunately, she relapsed again after the 9 months. And so after that, she did a clinical trial in conjunction with a bone marrow transplant, her second bone marrow transplant out of Stanford, Lucille Packard. And that was kind of hard. It was kind of hard. There's more radiation, more high dose chemo. I was her donor this time. It was pretty rough. No, it was rough. It was rough. 3 months after that, unfortunately, she relapsed again. So we came back to Johns Hopkins, back to Maryland. After that, I think we stayed in California, 5 or 6 months. And then we came back here. And we did some experimental medicines and drugs with her. She did another stint of Blena. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on some of the names of these therapies. We didn't do chemotherapy. Maybe we did a little bit of chemotherapy, but in conjunction with, give me a second. I'm gonna remember. PTSD brain. Oh my gosh, it's right on the tip of my. Anyway, we did that. It was a lot of pills, a lot. It's like 10 pills, big ones. And because she was so tiny, they had to tailor to it. You probably know what I'm talking about. Somebody knows out there what I'm talking about. Anyway, she did that for a little bit, and it did not get rid of her leukemia, but it kind of slowed it a tiny bit. She did another immunotherapy after that, another experimental medicine after that, because the leukemia just, was coming back. It was growing. What we were trying to do is get into another CAR T cell trial that was at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We were trying to get into that trial. We were trying to get into it before we had gone to Stanford, but we didn't. And so we were just kind of being very persistent to try to get into this trial because we had heard so many good things about it and seen so many other kids that had done great things with this. So we didn't get into it again, but we did get into Seattle Children's CAR T cell dual therapy trial, and we had that done at Children's National in DC. It was a Seattle product, but they allowed us to do it in DC, so we don't have to go all the way back to the West Coast, and that was very hard for her. She had a terrible side effects. She had aphasia, and it was a hard decision because she was the second child to get that clinical trial. The first trial, unfortunately, passed away, and they had to tell us that, they because it was on hold and was like, what's happening? And it's like the first child that got this, this happened and they passed away. Do you want to continue to go through with it? And we were like, oh my gosh, what do we do? We had no other options. We couldn't get into the other trial. It had closed down at the time. And our thoughts were, well, we know what will happen if we don't do anything, right? So we decided to put her in that trial. She actually did good for the first 2 weeks. And when they released us from the hospital, she started having symptoms and side effects at home where she basically had dementia. She forgot. She didn't know me. She didn't know dad. She walked into a closet, didn't know where she was. And she stopped talking. And she was just like staring and drooling. And we was like, what is happening? And we rushed her back to the hospital. And we had a very hard decision to make. They wanted to give her a drug to kill the CAR Ts. And my husband and I were like, what's going to happen? They couldn't tell us anything and we didn't know anything really. All they knew was we got to stop this because they don't want what happened to the first kid to happen to her, right? With this trial. And neither do we, but we was like, I don't know. We talked and we was like, we didn't want her to get it. Like, no, don't kill the CAR Ts. Don't kill them. And he was like very against us, right? The doctors was against us. They were upset that we didn't do what they said to do, And so they all walked out of the room. It was like a whole crew of them. You know how it is. They come in and they go out. And Ailani was in the ICU. And my husband and I, we talked. And we was like, did we make the right thing? Did we not? I was like, I don't know. And I was like, okay, go get them. Tell them to go get them. So he went out the door to go get the doctors. To tell them, okay, stop it or whatever. I forget the drug they had to give her to stop it. And they had got on an elevator. So he missed them, right? And he come back in the room. He was like, I missed them. They got on the elevator. I'll get the nurse to go get them and we're going to tell them to terminate it. And Ailani, she started talking. She got out of the bed. She walked, was able to walk to the bathroom with some help. But before she wasn't walking and she wasn't talking. And they had her head all wrapped up because they were monitoring her brain, trying to make sure it wasn't swelling and all this stuff. I was like, well, what is happening? And then the next day she got out of ICU and the doctors was like, wow. It was like, you guys made the right decision. We didn't think that was the right decision. I know it was hard for you guys and they were upset, with us for making that decision. But she turned around and we couldn't have predicted that either. No, we didn't know. We was just parents trying to figure out, what do we do? Do we do this? Do we not? We have no idea. They're upset at us. The doctors are all mad at us. What do we do? And so anyway, she got better and she got better. We got out of the hospital. And unfortunately, she relapsed again. She did relapse. The CAR Ts wore off after 2 months, I think. They wore off. But, it's such hard decisions to make. It's like, do we not do this? Do we do this? And yeah, so we ended up going into the next trial after that. So she's had 5 different trials, 5 different clinical trials. And she did experimental medicine. It's now FDA approved, but it was kind of experimental at the time. And it's for AOL and AML mostly. We had to drive to New York to the hospital in New York every week for about 6 months. I don't even know how we did it. That's like 4 hour drive every week because they wouldn't allow the testing to be done here at Hopkins. You know, when you're in a clinical trial, you kind of have to be there where the hospital is. So we drove back and forth every week for her to get testing and get the medicine and for them to test. And it slowed her leukemia down quite a bit. It slowed it down. It didn't, she wasn't cured. It didn't take it away, but it did slow it down for her. And that's all she was taking was it was a menin inhibitor, actually. It's FDA approved now, but it didn't have a name at that time. I think they was calling it the Syndex, trial. And yeah, so it slowed her leukemia down, and it just bought us time. It was really what we were trying to do anyway. It was just buy us time with her and time where she wasn't sick and in the hospital, and it was something that she could do where she could still be a kid, but not be bald or be sick in the hospital, And so that medication did that for her until we actually got into the trial we had been trying to get into for the longest time, which was another CAR T-cell trial at Children's Hospital Philadelphia. Long process.
Yeah, it definitely is. But kind of like I mentioned in the beginning, you're that long process, but you're forced to make those decisions quick, fast, and in a hurry with whatever research you can do in that moment. And I've often said too that you'll be given forms to sign that look, with when your child is going to be administered any type of treatment. But there's one document that you sign, and out of a 10-page document, the other 9 pages are the side effects or what could happen. And you're forced to make unimaginable decisions. And unfortunately, on the very last one, it'll say up into and including death. But you know exactly what's going to happen if you do nothing. Right. If you try nothing, this is what's going to happen. You have to try. And, as parents, to be honest with you, in this community, and, no matter whether your child is being treated, they're in maintenance, or if they've passed, unfortunately, you never really know if you made the right choice. You're doing what you can at that moment, and you're doing the best thing for your kids. And it's crazy to think that, we're relying on what ifs and maybes at this point. And it's sad, to be honest with you, but, we do what we have to do. And our kids, Ailani is no exception to this. They prove how incredible they truly are, and it will just bounce around. They're innocent, and they just want to be kids. They understand, right, a lot more than we give them credit for, but they just want to be kids at the end of the day, and that's what they are. And they prove how much they can handle just by being themselves. But we have to also kind of get away from the moniker of, well, they're kids, they'll just bounce back from all this, because they don't always bounce back from this, and they're affected in the moment and for the rest of their life. But we want to give them the rest of their life to move forward and to not be defined by it, but also, own kind of what they've gone through and what they've done for themselves. What were some of the more major side effects that any of her treatments caused that even maybe she's still dealing with now?
One thing that we were so afraid of was after her first relapse, she got an infection, and she had just had high dose chemotherapy. We were just discharged from the hospital. We were walking in our house, and she scratched her knee on the sidewalk. And it wasn't a big scratch. It wasn't anything crazy. It was like, even a little Band-Aid could cover it up. But she scratched her knee, and that was horrific. In 3 days, she stopped using her arm and her leg, and she got fever, and was like, what is this? And we took her in there, and they didn't know what it was first. They just didn't know. They saw, it was like, it was a scratch on her knee. She stopped using her arm, and she stopped walking, and she kept getting fever. They was giving her everything. She was bloated. She was red. She was so sick. My husband actually diagnosed her because he's like a mad scientist when it comes to figuring out what's going on with Ailani. And she had a fungal infection. It was a fusarium that had been on our tree that fell on the sidewalk. And when she scratched her knee, it got inside the cut of her knee. And because she had no immune system, absolutely none, when they, get high dose, they're just like a newborn baby. They're nothing. Normally, this wouldn't bother anybody that's, a regular, not, you don't have to be super healthy, but a regular human, it wouldn't be a problem. But because she had no immune system, it disseminated through her entire body, her limbs, her lungs. And what my husband did was he found some kind of way. He's cybersecurity, but he found another dad or parent online and saw a picture of their daughter who was asking about she had an infection or a sore, and he was like, "Oh my goodness, that looks like kind of like what Ailani's looked like." And he contacted the dad, and they spoke, and he found the doctor that worked, I think, at NIH. He was a world-renowned doctor for this fusarium. And we got in some kind of way, got in touch with him, and he said she needs lymphocytes, you know. And so my husband called the oncology floor. I think it was like 1 or 2 in the morning, and they come in. It's like, your husband's on the phone. I was like, yeah, I'm sure. I'm not surprised. And he was like, he said, come wake you up and to do a biopsy on her knee and blah, blah, blah. So he told them really like, this is what I think it is. This is what needs to be done. I want her to have a biopsy. This, all the things, because this is him, and you've met him, so you probably know a little bit about how he is. And yeah, that happened. They did the biopsy on her knee. They found out it was a fusarium. They got her the right. We don't know. They was giving her so many antibiotics. They don't even know what it was. It was just making her sick. But we had people that would donating their blood, and so she got, I think it was 3 or 4 days. I think she was supposed to have like 6 infusions of it. She ended up getting 4. Some people dropped out. It's a big deal when you donate white blood cells because it's not as easy as the other ones. And it was just great that so many people rallied and did that. And what they told us at Hopkins was they hadn't done that kind of infusion in like 9 years. And so it was like a madhouse outside her room. All the doctors, everybody is like standing around waiting to see what happens. And so that was very scary. And it was at the beginning of COVID, I think, yeah. And so it was really scary because they wouldn't allow my husband and I to be at the hospital with her. We couldn't be there at the same time, and she was very sick. She had a wound back on her knee where they had, did surgery on her knee to try to get the necrotic skin and dead tissue and stuff out. So she was so sick. She had a catheter, and on her knee, and it was just me, and there wasn't very many nurses there because it was COVID, and it was just hard, without us both being together because we was always a tag team, So that was very hard. And they were going to stop her. She was going to get CAR T-cell therapy, and they was going to stop that because she was so sick with the infection, And we were grateful that the doctor, her oncologist he said, well, we know she's fighting this infection. He had to sign off on her getting the CAR Ts, right? And we was like, he's not going to sign off because she's still so sick, But she got those white blood transfusion, and she started getting better. Like the next day, she started getting better. And he said, you know what? She's going to get these CAR T cells anyway. And he signed off on them. And I think it was maybe 2 weeks later, we were walking out the hospital. Like she was walking out with her barely walking for me. She was barely walking, but she got her cast off. She was walking out in her little bald head, dancing. So that was a really scary time. It was a very scary. We honestly didn't think we was going to leave the hospital with her. It's just hard. Even thinking back, it's just hard, scary, and I don't even really know how we got through besides faith, hope, and God. Yeah. So that was a scary time for us, and that was 2020. So that was right after her bone marrow transplant. Another scary time was when she had the CAR T cells at Children's National when she got aphasia and she couldn't talk and she couldn't walk, and we didn't know if she was going to make it through. We obviously knew what happened to the first kid, and we were like really back and forth beating ourselves up, like, why did we do this? Should we have done this? And so, yeah, those were 2 of the really, really scary times and very hard times.
Yeah, it's, and the more and more I listen to other family stories, and I listen to your story, and it's just that everything in our community seems to line up like this. I know that, our daughter was diagnosed in January of 2020, and then 2 months later, the world shut down, and we could no longer, both my wife and I couldn't be in the hospital together, and we were separated in that sense. I had those phone calls where I said, I don't know if I'm bringing her home. I don't know if I'm going to be able to. But we also had those accomplishments where the doctors were amazed, and 2 weeks after 3 brain surgeries, she walked out by herself. It's up and down, and those kind of things. Just to go back and even think about it for a second, it breaks my heart, and it brings on emotions that I thought I had hidden, but I know that they're not. It's always going to be right at the forefront because, no matter what, I think that when your child, when they, that ever popular, thing that everybody does that, we're proud of as accomplishments is ringing the bell, or they get to a point where they're in a maintenance phase or anything like that. It's like, I feel like those are when the real fight starts, because you've really beaten the bulk of things, and now you're working to keep it away and not from coming back, and you're fighting all of that. Those side effects that just will absolutely, bring the strongest person to their knees to watch this happen, and you have no control as a parent. You're supposed to be the protector and the provider and all of this, and you can't do anything. You can't stop it. That, we dealt with locked in the box is what I would call it. After one drug that we would give JC, 12 hours. She couldn't talk, walk, communicate, nothing. And it was scary. And to not be able to do anything and to be by yourself, wake up and 12 hours later and had no idea what had happened. I would thank God for that she didn't remember. But what these kids go through and still have that smile on their face and the ability to show us what life is really about, like that's, I think that anybody in the world, I don't care what part you are, what you support, any part of life, any of that, talk to one of these kids for 5 minutes, please. They will change your perspective on life. They will show you what's important, and to talk to the parents and understand we have absolutely no idea why we came out on the other side. We don't know how we got through it. I will tell you that, as part of a very small group, 20% or less, how do we as couples stay together through all of this? Because we have probably one of the highest separation, divorce, whatever rates within any type of thing like this, because it's so hard mentally, physically, spiritually, everything. You're just exhausted. And people have asked, how did you get through it? I honestly don't have the answer. I don't know.
All I know is I prayed constantly, prayed, always praying, because that's all I really could do. Like, that's it. It was my husband, I, and Ailani. It was us. Like, through my family's in Texas, his family's in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. It was us and, some of our military friends and our people that we met in the neighborhoods that we moved into in the beginning. Going from Ronald McDonald House, we were in the Ronald McDonald House, I think, for 7 months. Yeah, 7 months back and forth to the hospital, and her being in the Ronald McDonald House before we found a place to actually live. When we finally got our stuff from the military, I think it was 2021. So a lot of years before we even received our, our clothes and her toys and stuff like that, stuff she grew out of. I was like, oh my goodness. But you're right. Kids, our kids. They go through this traumatic journey. And most of them are better than most kids you've ever met, and not just because, they've seen a lot, they've been through a lot, but their heart is just still so pure. And I know most cancer kids are like this, because Ailani is especially like this. She is just the most caring child, and they'll see another child that's bald or not feeling too well or whatever, and they just go up to them and want to play or want to talk or see how they're doing. They're so compassionate towards each other. And that was one thing that was kind of hard, seeing her go to school, public school, being around some kids that are not like that, and very cliquey, where she just want to be friends with everybody. And the questions are like, well, mommy, why am I the only one that has cancer in my school? Like, none of the other kids have cancer. But she had only been around cancer kids till she was second grade. She didn't know really anybody else besides cancer kids or kids that were sick, because she grew up in a hospital, and that wasn't always, honestly, Ailani loved going to the hospital in the beginning, because she got to play with other kids, even though she might not feel good sometimes, or she was getting chemo, but she was around kids that were like her, and they talked, they played, they made slime, my goodness, and they had a child life there, and all the volunteers that just catered to them and let them play with paint and slime and all that stuff. And that's the things she remembers, even still, a lot of it is the fun times that they get to do music or somebody come. And sometimes, she does sometimes Kids versus Cancer. And I said, I know you remember the fun things that you got to do in the hospital with the child life and playing. I said, but when you talk to Congress sometime, I want you to make sure you tell them the hard things, right? Don't forget to tell them about the hard things that you get to do or that you had to do and you still have to do. She was like, okay, mommy. I was like, yeah, I know you get to play with your battle buddies and stuff in the hospital, but make sure that they understand you still do hard things as well. So, but yeah.
Yeah, it's honestly great to see that they can find the good in any situation, that they can
Mhm.
find the happiness in it. And that, I think us as adults, us as parents, we spend a lot of time focusing on the negative, and we can't find the good in every situation, or we can't find the positive. And I think that they just have that innate ability to do it. And that, if you ask me, that's what we're missing in this world right now, is that ability to find the good in people, in situations, and find a way to make other people happy. And that's what they want to do. They care more about how we are going to handle the day, how we are going to handle, unfortunate things that I've heard and talked to families about in our own situation, is that for some reason they're not here. They're worried about how we're going to be. How are we going to hold up? How are we going to get through the day? And that's who they are. We're making these tough decisions, and they're doing what they need to do just to be a kid, and that's all they should be worried about.